Hi everyone, well, great. Thanks again for joining today. Delighted to join you from Moneypenny, actually, where we've been out with the team this morning. And very pleased that you could make the time for this afternoon. We're expecting around 40 people in total at the event, but we're going to get going now, just conscious of everyone's time. And we're delighted to bring you all together for the first of our Unlocked series of 2023. And as a reminder, these deep dives, as we call them, are designed to bring leaders of our portfolio businesses together for topics that we hope are of interest, and certainly in our experience working with the teams that we back, are often finding that the people are intrigued to do more and understand how other people in the portfolio are working on these topics. These are very much an opportunity for you to interact directly with the speakers on the webinar and the rest of the audience as well. So please do get involved. And as you all have seen in the comms for this event, we're pleased to be running this deep dive with our own growth specialist, Chris Gianelli, who's our expert in all things sales. And Chris is going to be joined today by Tracy Ellison from Cypher, who is leading on customer success at the business. I'll introduce you to Chris shortly, but ahead of them, let's just see who's joining today. So we have a great audience today, and everybody from across the ECI portfolio is here. And I'm well aware we've got some old new faces in the room. So here's a list of the portfolio companies today. And we do also have some friends of the firm who are joining as well. So welcome to everyone, and thanks for making the time. In terms of housekeeping, Sarah is just going to take us through a little bit of a refresher on Zoom. So I'll let Sarah just talk us through.
Thank you, Lewis. Now, I do know that a lot of you use Zoom, so please forgive me, but I know not everybody does. I thought to get everyone on a level playing field, just do a quick run through. So everything you need today is at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to use the reactions and the chat. We'd love to hear from you. There will be a specific, a dedicated Q&A session at the end. So do feel free to use the reactions and the raise hand functionality there, and we'll keep an eye on that and pose your questions to Chris. Please do keep your cameras on. We love to see you. The reason we love these deep dives is because we get to see each other again. I know it's been a while since we saw some of you in June, so we'd love to see you, but please do stay on mute unless you're asking or answering a question, so that we keep the quality of the call great for everybody. I will just flag that we are recording the session today. That's so that we can send it to those who aren't able to join. So if there's anything, and there shouldn't be anything that comes up that you don't want recorded, but if there is, please do just drop me a note afterwards. That's it from me. Not too long, as I promised. Back to you, Lewis.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And now what I'm going to do is turn to Chris. And Chris joined us earlier this year as a specialist in sales and sales performance, and in fact leads his own practice within the Sandler Group based in London. And we're working with Chris for a number of years now at different companies in our portfolio. And delighted that you can join us today to talk through customer success.
Thanks, Lewis. Welcome everybody. Really appreciate you joining the call today, and really pleased to have Tracy with us today as well for the Q&A. So we're going to talk about this. This is the topic: 5 ingredients for driving growth in existing accounts. And I guess the first question we should start with is why? Why did we choose this topic out of all the topics we could have chosen? And really, in our conversations at ECI, it was about this, that actually, this is really one of the things that a lot of organizations really struggle with. And it's harder than people think, right? It's harder than people think, probably why you joined the call. And what we find is most people, most organizations, should I say, service and serve their customers really well. But servicing isn't selling. Servicing isn't selling. We're going to kind of explore that as we go through the conversation today. And Lewis and I talked about this, and I spend a lot of my working life helping scaling organizations. But this frustration that we're talking about isn't just one that kind of is confined to medium-sized or scaling businesses. It's not just smaller organizations that struggle with it. I met probably a couple of years ago now, they're a client, but first time I met the chief exec of one of the world's biggest media agencies. I won't share their name, but you'll have heard of them. And I met with their chief exec, and he said to me that his agencies, and you know that model, but his agencies have so much that depth and breadth, so many things that they could sell to their clients. And so it was so frustrating for him when he would meet with a client who decided not to renew, or they lost a piece of business. And the feedback that he got was that the client would tell him that the account teams, the people that were responsible for looking after the business, they just didn't feel like they either challenged them enough or didn't feel that they brought anything new. And so that was hugely frustrating for him, because he was like, there's so much that we could bring to people, and he didn't understand why his team were failing, despite the fact that there was so much they could sell. And his conclusion really was that his teams, by and large, were servicing their clients well, sometimes over-servicing, different problem. But what they weren't doing is selling. And in his world, from an agency perspective, we may talk about this from a CS or an account management perspective, actually the word selling was a problem for their organization culturally. And so it was driving him mad. If it drives him mad, it's all right if it drives you mad. So we're going to talk about that today and unpick that a little bit. And so when we first start a conversation with an organization and we're starting to look at this, I guess the question that we ask is, do they have a GPS that will help them get to where they want to get to? And will that GPS help them navigate that path through account growth? So what do we mean by GPS? Well, really what we mean is goals, plans, and strategies. And so what I'm going to just do now is, just to kick us off, really, just pose a couple of questions. Oops, excuse me, not that slide. And just pose a couple of questions for you. And I'd like you to just maybe, as you go through these, just give yourself a bit of a RAG status, red, amber, green, of where you are today. So the first one I want to talk about is goals. Have you got clearly defined goals? In terms of where you are today, the white space that you have today versus where you want to be in the future, do you know what your goal is? And if you have, are those goals SMART goals? Are they specific, measurable, action, realistic, timely? So just have a think about that. Are you red, amber, green on that? Have a think. Let's go to plans. Here's the question. Is there a clear path with milestones along the way that you and your teams will follow that essentially forms that roadmap? And have you considered the implications in that plan and the consequences of your goals, and the implications that they have on your people, on your process, on the knowledge that people need, and the technology that you might need to execute? Are these in your plan? So just quick thought on that. Are you red, amber, green when it comes to plans? Let's go to the third point then quickly, strategies. So have you assessed your currently deployed account development strategies and tactics? The question is really, do you have clarity around the things that your teams need to build competence around, I guess, in order to execute that plan that you have? What attitudes and techniques are your people going to need tomorrow that they don't have today? So just maybe that one as well, red, amber, green, where do you think you are on that? And most of the organizations that we work with, and you may be similar, but often goals is pretty green, right? Pretty clear about what it is that we're setting out to do and maybe why. Plans, usually amber, pretty good shape. The place where the wheels often come off for people and where it's often red is around strategies, particularly strategies and tactics. And it's interesting, the further down the organization we get, the closer we get to the point of execution, i.e. the teams on the ground, the more we kind of see the gaps and the cracks start to appear. So that's what we're going to kind of focus and put some attention on as we go through the coming minutes. So that's where I'm going to kind of take you in the conversation today. And as we think about those strategies and tactics, what we see is a bit of a sweet spot, really. We don't have time for an exhaustive discussion about all the things that contribute and are important in the pursuit of account growth. We don't have time to do that, but we can identify some key things that if you put some attention on them, what we see is those organizations that do and do it well get a significant shift in performance. And when we kind of group and look at where that sort of sweet spot is, what we see is there's a real sweet spot where strong value propositions meet highly competent or capable CS or account management teams and individuals, where that also meets highly effective management and coaching. That's probably no surprise, but that's where we see a sweet spot when these three things come together. So I'm going to share with you the 5 things that Lewis and I talked about when we thought about this session. What are the 5 things that we usually see that are in place for organizations that are pretty strong when it comes to same account growth? So I'm going to talk to you about these in turn, if I could. And for each one, I'm maybe going to ask you a bit of a question. And so the first thing that I'd like us to think about, if you will, is conversational pain-based value propositions. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But the question that I've got for you on that is this. If you were to ask all of your account managers or CS team, whoever is charged with upsell and cross-sell in your organization, if you got those people together and you ask them to demonstrate for you how they open up a conversation with a customer about a specific product or service that they have responsibility for selling, right, for developing the opportunity around, what sort of things would you hear? Just have a think about that. What sort of things do you think you would hear if you got them all together? Not necessarily in a pressure situation, it's a friendly situation. What sort of things would you hear? Would everybody be different? Would they all know what to say? Would they all know what to say and how to say it? Or are you left wondering whether you really know the answer to that question? I'd suggest, and we ask people to kind of run that exercise all the time. And so if you have the opportunity at your next team meeting, maybe there's a particular kind of part of your whitespace portfolio that you're asking people to focus on, just ask them that question. Tell me how you, or show me even, how you kind of start a conversation with a customer when you want to explore whether or not there's appetite for this particular thing that we can help with. Just interesting to see what comes back when you ask that question. So let's dive into it a little bit, give you a little bit more detail on this. There's a lot of words here, but I guess before we get into this, conversational pain-based value propositions, there's a place for our product teams and our marketing teams to absolutely influence and have a part of the value proposition creation. But that has to be translated into a conversation. Because when we're talking about engaging our customers, they're going to happen by and large through human to human contact, right? It needs to be a conversation. And so the value proposition needs to be a team effort, but it certainly needs to be an integrated piece of work. And usually that's sales and marketing, but could include product too. We're looking for a conversation essentially. And that's why the word conversation is up front. We're hoping that we can get the customer to open up just in the first instance about exploring the topic that we want to talk about. It is not pitching. It is not about you. It's not about your product. And that's probably where we need to be really clear. And it's not a criticism necessarily, but most account managers and CS individuals might make the mistake of thinking that the answer is telling the client about this new thing and about what it does. And most people would be forgiven for assuming that's what they need to do. But here's the thing, people buy emotionally, right? They justify their decisions intellectually, but essentially they buy emotionally. And therefore, we have to start with emotion. So what does that mean? Well, the opposite of emotion is intellect, I suppose, in some respect. But an intellectual explanation of your module or your product or whatever it is that we're talking about is not really compelling. In fact, if we're honest, it could be pretty boring, right? Could be pretty boring. So your value proposition, our value propositions should start with pain. A concept that we're all in sales and marketing familiar with, but needs to start with pain. We need to articulate the types of problems and challenges that we help fix or address. And also thinking about what it says here around every persona's different. If you think about that, and Tracy's on the call, and she'll talk to us a little bit later on, but in Tracy's business, she might, or one of her team, might have the responsibility for selling a payroll product or even a service, right? And the reality is that conversation could happen with an HR director, could happen with a payroll manager, could happen with a CFO. And all of those different stakeholders have got different types of problems or pains that they would resonate with them and get them talking about and being open about exploring a new product, a new offering, or a new service. So we've got to test for pain. I'm going to share an example with you what that looks like in a minute. So maybe is a bit conceptual what I'm talking about right now, but we're going to test for pain. That's the idea in these conversational pain-based propositions. We're then going to just let them know that we help, just simply, and that's not about telling them exactly what we do or how we do it, or how many hours R&D we've put into it, none of that stuff. And then we're just going to ask them a question about whether it makes sense to talk. It's a no pressure based approach. It's quite different from maybe what we might have seen in I don't know, in your previous experience of a pitch or I don't know, an elevator pitch or whatever it might be, but it's going to be a little bit different to that because it has to be conversational. So let me just share with you an example. So here's a simple example. I'm going to share with this just as a sort of rough example, but my clients are probably different to yours, but my clients might be, stakeholders might be a chief revenue officer or a chief commercial officer or a chief exec. Usually that's the type of individual that I might be talking to. And so here's a conversation that I might start that is essentially a pain-based value proposition in the form of a conversation. Just take a look at this. And I might say something like this. A conversation we're having a lot at the moment relates to CS teams and the pressure on those teams as they struggle to deliver the cross-sell and upsell demands that they have on them. And the teams we talk to are usually doing a pretty good job of serving their clients, and renewal levels are usually okay. But for whatever reason, they find it really, really, really difficult and challenging to grow their accounts. And so we're increasingly being asked to kind of get involved and help them with the skills and the systems that they need to be more effective. I don't suppose that sounds like any of the challenges that your CS teams face at all. So I thought I'd share that. It's just a conversation, right? And I've just drawn your attention to a couple of things. There's some emotive words in there. And I don't mean to patronize you. I'm not suggesting you don't understand how to communicate this, but think about it at your team level. Could your team articulate in the language of pain the proposition that you have without hitting somebody in the face and making it feel all about you? And we know that we train thousands of organizations and individuals every year. And we know that when we shift this to a pain-based conversation, the amount of resonance we get in those conversations with our prospects and with our stakeholders of existing clients is transformed. So maybe something to think about. Okay. So let me move on a little bit. Let's talk about accountability. That was the second point, a culture of accountability. Here's another question for you. Maybe just have a think about this. So actually, there's two questions really. The first one is this: does everyone in your account team or your CS team, again, thinking about those as kind of similar teams, do they have cross-sell and upsell goals or targets? So I know we talked about organizational goals, but does each individual have a target or a goal in place specifically for cross-sell or upsell? Maybe they do. Second question is this: okay, if that's the case, does everyone on that team who has that target, do they know exactly what behaviors they need to perform weekly in order to achieve that goal? And is there a management process that holds them accountable for executing that behavior? That's the question. Just think about that. Do they have a target? Do they know what behavioral stuff they need to do on a weekly basis to ultimately deliver that? And then is there a management process that holds them accountable for delivering it? Just think about whether or not that's in place, because we know highly performant organizations have those characteristics. So let's dive into that, see what that looks like. It starts with clear expectations and targets. We've just talked about that. Most organizations will be pretty good at setting targets and expectations. The first thing that we would suggest usually that happens is this process that we call backcasting. Now, everyone on the call will be really familiar with forecasting, right? We're obsessed with forecasting, understandably and quite rightly. But this is backcasting, and backcasting is just the opposite. It says to the individual, right? Let's talk about your individual goals. Let's think about what it is that you want to achieve. That might be different from the targets, by the way. Your individual goal may well be to deliver 150% of your target. That's great. Once we've understood that goal that you have, let's imagine ourselves a year from now, 6 months from now, whatever that time frame is, and let's look back. Let's look back at what it is that we did to get here. Let me give you an example. Let's break it down. So let's say I've got a software business, and I want to increase the attach rate on each territory from 40% to 50% for a specific module. Let's imagine that. If you're not in the software world, apologies, just as a simple example. If I know that I know my average order value of that module, I could work out that I also need 10 deals, right? In order to get to that penetration level, I need 10 deals, okay? And if I need 10 deals, hopefully what I can also work out is for every deal, how many proposals do I need, right? I know this feels like kind of fairly old school maybe, but let's backwards re-engineer this. So if I need 10 deals and I win 50% of the proposals that I put on the table, I need 20 proposals to win 10 deals, right? And maybe then I also cast back even further and recognize that it takes me 3 first conversations with a customer to get to a proposal stage. So if I keep doing the maths, that's 60 first conversations to get to 20 proposals to get to 10 wins, right? So, okay, so that's good. So now I know I need 5 per month, essentially. That's what it works out. 5 per month, 1 per week. That feels kind of okay. Maybe it's a bit more than 1 per week, something like that. But I also then think, well, okay, how many conversations or attempts at conversations do I need in order to get one meaningful conversation? I.e., how many times have I got to share that value proposition that I just talked about to get one meaningful conversation? Because every time I share my value proposition, not everybody's going to say, well, yeah, actually, that does sound like the sort of challenges we have. 2 out of 3 of them might say, do you know what? Our CS team is running absolutely fine, couldn't be happier with it. Okay, maybe it's not a pain, maybe it's not a conversation. But if I know that I've got to reach out 3 times across my customer base, across my territory, then I know what my behaviors are. My behavior is 3 outreach conversations to my customer base. And what can then happen is I can use my territory plans and my account plans as the vehicles for defining who it is that I need to go and speak to. Where is my white space? And instead of my territory and account plans being something that I quickly fill out when my boss wants to see it, or when the chief exec wants to do a quarterly review and I've been invited along to share one, right? Because that's what really happens. People by and large don't use account plans in the way that they should. And so when we think about behaviors and we work from behavior up, it also forces us to use the tools in the way that they were designed. Our territory plans and our account plans become much more meaningful as part of that process. The only other thing I'd share with you on this is what we also see in terms of high-performing organizations is this. Each individual understands what it is that behaviorally trying to do. It's tracked weekly and reviewed monthly. So our people are tracking it weekly. Maybe we're talking to them about it on a weekly one-to-one or something like that, but we're reviewing it monthly, taking corrective action. Maybe there's coaching, maybe there's training involved, but there's some kind of review on a monthly basis. Okay. So that's culture of accountability. That's the second thing that we notice. The third thing that we notice when it comes to this sweet spot is coaching competence. So now we're thinking about the manager, the line manager. So the question on this that I think we should probably ask ourselves is this one. How much time as a percentage of their working week do your line managers spend coaching their people? How much as a percentage of their working time do your line managers spend coaching their people? Just have a think about that. And coaching isn't training. That's different. Coaching also isn't pipeline conversations or deal conversations, or at least not usually. It's dedicated time that we put towards helping an individual improve. Think about coaching in that sense. So maybe we'll just drop some thoughts in the chat here. Can we get the chat up? Just percentage of time. What do you think our line managers are spending in terms of time? Can we see the chat? Just give us a couple of thoughts. Don't leave me uncomfortable up here. Come on, let's get some thoughts in the chat. What do you think? 25%, Lisa says. 10%, yeah, less than 10%. Yeah, that's pretty typical. Not enough. Yeah, that's usually the answer, Jonathan. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, so pretty normal responses. What about if I told you that in terms of what we see, and this is globally, not just what I see, but we think that our top performing leaders spend somewhere between 30 to 40% of their time on both tactical and strategic coaching of their people. It's one of the biggest, most important things that managers can do. But as Jonathan said in the chat, it's just usually nowhere near enough. It's just usually nowhere near enough. Now, there's lots of reasons for that, that we haven't necessarily got time to go into today. But another piece of research that I thought I'd share with you that might be important. Every year we survey thousands of salespeople and sales leaders. And when I talk about sales leaders, I'm including CS leaders and heads of account management, that kind of thing. And here's what the survey data said. That 43% of sales managers, which is basically anyone who manages people with a quota or a target, 43% of sales managers do not receive effective training prior to taking up the role. It's pretty amazing, right? So we're going to ask a lot of these people to drive account growth and lead your people to drive account growth, yet 43% turn up without any training to be able to do that. And 30% of people who work for those managers, 34%, said that their managers are not effective or not very effective at coaching. And only 12% thought that their managers were very effective at coaching. So it kind of tells you something about the gap that we've got. And that was an EMEA and a US survey with kind of decent sized numbers in each of those. So we know that this is a challenge. So let's just think about what we need in place. If we're going to task these individuals with driving growth for us, the lifeblood of our organization, what does their manager need to look like? And what we think is line managers, I was going to say should, but I'm going to say must, I think, must be role models in terms of execution and should be able to demonstrate what it is that we need people to demonstrate, right? Because demonstration could be an important part of coaching. So our managers should be able to say to their account manager or their CS person, I should be able to say on a client call that we're going to do together, I might say to the person who works for me, I'll pick up the conversation around whitespace. There's a couple of key opportunities I think we have here. We talked about these in our preparation for the meeting. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to observe me in the meeting. Just observe me and evaluate me as I open up the conversation and progress that and seek to progress that conversation. And then we're done, we'll kind of debrief the conversation, see how I got on, see what we both learned from it. Right. I should feel comfortable as a manager being able to do that. Now, maybe that is the case. Maybe you've got that the case, but that's certainly a kind of a standard that we would want to put in place. And if your managers have got gaps around that, then maybe they need some support. It's not suggesting they're the wrong people if they can't do that today, but I think they need to get to that place pretty quickly. The other thing we might want to take a look at is diagnosing root causes. This is really, really important. And I think it's often overlooked. So let me give you a scenario. Let's get us thinking about this. So let's imagine a scenario where you're asking a customer success or an account management team, let's say, who might not previously have been responsible for account growth. Maybe they were responsible for renewals, let's say. This is a common situation we're seeing at the moment. Last year or so, seeing a big shift between who's now commercially responsible for growing the business. And maybe that's happening in your business, but certainly seeing much more kind of attention on CS and account teams for more than renewals. So let's imagine we're now tasking that team with upsell, cross-sell, not just renewals. And you think about this, you think about an individual on that team who's struggling to do that, who's struggling to reach out and have conversations with new stakeholders in their customer base. just in the chat, let's have a look. Why might they be struggling? Just any thoughts? Why might they be struggling? What do you think you'd see? What might they be struggling with? Why would they struggle to make those conversations happen? Give us a few examples in the chat. Don't see themselves as salespeople. Yeah, absolutely. What have you got? Come on, team, help me out here. Why would they struggle? Talking to the wrong person. Yeah. Don't want to do sales. Yeah, it's not my thing. Scared of being asked the question. Yeah, that's really common, Lisa. They lack the skills and therefore confidence to do. Confidence is a huge thing. Yeah. Not confident. Confidence coming through a lot there. I think Tracy may even talk about that when she talks about one of the things that she's keen to support her teams around. I think what we've just seen is, we think about this, and we'd encourage you to maybe think about this when we're looking at an individual and we're coaching individuals. We try and get managers that we work with to see their people through the lens of behavior, attitude, or technique. And we know that success is driven by a combination of those factors. And often what we find is managers can sometimes misdiagnose. And so what we've kind of seen from you is there's some mindset things, some confident things. That might be attitude. It might be that we see they're not doing certain things. They're not making those outreach conversations happen. It might just be because they've never done it before and they just technically don't have the kind of skills to do it. But as I think one of the people in the chat said, there's then that combination of confidence as well. So, or they don't see themselves as a salesperson. We're going to talk about that in a little while. But if we've got managers in place looking after those people, we've got to tackle the real root causes of that. And I think the things that you flagged here around confidence are massive in this group of people. Massive in this group of people. This self-concept of I'm not really a salesperson. That's not what I signed up to do. Right through to I just don't feel comfortable talking to senior people. There's a whole host of things that we're going to hear. And so what's really important is that we train our managers, that our managers are capable of coaching. And yeah, not necessarily a standard coaching model. That's not what I'm here to talk about. It could be anything, it could be grow. There are lots of different coaching models that are not particularly difficult to kind of get embedded and get your managers comfortable with. But how do we know they're good coaches? How do we know that they're making time for coaching? We talked about that. Let's make sure that we put some deliberate time in to coach our people. And the last thing that I just wanted to mention on this is follow-up, and it relates to coaching. But one of the things that we find that is so simple to address is follow-up. Most managers that we talk to, if they're honest, they end up coaching the same thing again and again and again. Right? People say, I just feel like I'm coaching the same thing. And usually when you get behind it, it's because they're pretty poor at follow-up, pretty poor at making sure at the end of a coaching session, before we leave, and this is a little tip, really easy to do, before we leave, a bit like we would do with a prospect from a sales perspective, before we leave, we're going to make sure we put some time in the diary to figure out what happened as a consequence of you executing on the actions that we agreed that you would take. And then when we come back, we'll evaluate where we've got to versus where we hoped we would get to, what the results were, and whether or not we need to kind of do something else in order to support your development and growth. Not necessarily in those words, but that's essentially what we're trying to do. And I just think for all of us, this is massive. For those of you who are getting older like me, you might remember Jack Welch when he was at GE. And I was always, when I read that book, one of the things that jumped out at me was one of Jack Welch's main things was follow-up. He said it's the simplest, but one of the most effective things that he ever did. Everybody knew when Jack met them, he was following up. And once he developed a culture around his own personal brand, that people knew he would come back and ask them how they got on and put some time in the diary, make sure he held them accountable for taking the actions that we agreed, then suddenly everything got a lot easier. And I think most of us could take a lesson out of that book. So maybe follow up is something that you could encourage your managers just to get a little bit tighter on. Let's talk about this. right people, right seats. Now, Tracy, I think we'll talk about this in a fair amount of detail. So I'm going to skip us through this, but here's the question on this one. Maybe you could just reflect on this. How do you know that you've got the right people in the roles that you've got? How do you know the roles are the right roles? But really what I'm asking you is, how do you know that the people you've got in those roles are the people that will deliver the goals that you have? How do you really know? How do you really know? Not what do you feel, but how do you really know? Can you answer that question, and can you convince yourself that you really know? That would be the question I'd want to ask. Let's dive into that a little bit. And I guess what we're coming from, or the perspective I'm coming from here, is when we talk to most of our clients, what they recognize is that what got them here won't get them there. What got them here won't get them there. It's a phrase we hear a lot. And so maybe ask this question. So when did you last review the job description for the roles that we're talking about? Those roles that are the lifeblood of our organization, that are driving upsell and cross-sell. When did you last assess or reassess the job descriptions for those roles? Because for us, job descriptions shouldn't just be the tool that we cobble together when we're going to hire somebody. I'm not suggesting you're as laissez-faire as that, but often people are. Those job descriptions really should be an evergreen view of what it is that we need people to deliver. And if we understand that, and every now and again we take the opportunity to refresh that, the frequency of that will depend on the degree of change in the business. But what that should allow us to do is to define or even redefine the competencies that we need. So again, back to that question that I asked you earlier, that scenario rather, where we said, well, let's imagine we've got a set of people who've not traditionally been responsible for upsell and cross-sell, and now we're asking them to do that. It's fair to say we're going to need some different competencies, isn't it? There's going to be some different competencies. Just have a think about the different competencies that we might need. We probably need them to be a little bit more resilient. So we might need them to have a lower need for approval, because we've got to start selling, not servicing, right? We might even need negotiation competencies that we didn't have before, right? Maybe they need to be able to manage conflict and difficult conversations. Maybe they need to have some competence around equal business stature, being able to kind of create and command that. There'll be a whole, because they're dealing now at a more senior level than maybe they have before, as they seek to move into parts of the organization without their new business support. So what competencies do they now need? And once you've defined those competencies, well, how are you going to assess them? How are you going to really know? Because sometimes we're close to people and we kind of see it. Sometimes we're too close to people to see it. So how are you going to measure and assess the team? That would be the next question. So we know highly performant organizations, a bit like Tracy has, start assessing the team to make sure that they've got what it is that they need to get them where they need to get to. So it could be psychometrics, could be behavioral profiling, could be competency-based frameworks, right? We've probably come across all of those things and used all of those things at time. But there's some amazing low-cost tools, either self-developed or we buy off the shelf, to frankly allow us to assess for those, to make sure that we've got the right people in the right seats. And then we're left with a pretty harsh question, aren't we? Which is this one: can we change the people, or do we need to change the people? So there's a question that we all need to face every now and again. Let me come to this one last. We're nearly through here. So let's talk about sales skills really quickly. A quick question on this one. Think about those teams that we talked about. How many times per month do they practice? How many times per month do your teams practice? How many times per month do they develop and hone the skills that they need to deliver on the really important growth goals that you have? Do you know how many times a month they practice? Because it's amazing that despite growth being the #1 concern for most businesses, most chief execs that I might talk to, there's usually not a culture of practice. And in selling, whether we're talking about account management or CS, still selling because we've got to drive revenue, we're in a performance business, right? And people in performance businesses practice, whether you're an actor or a sports person or an account manager or a CS person. If you're in a performance business, we know that practice allows you to perform at your best, when it matters. So just think about that. What does practice look like in your organization? Here's something that we get to think about. So some of you mentioned confidence, or selling isn't for me, or selling's not what I signed up for. And in that agency that I mentioned at the start of the call, one of the things that we had to agree to when we started working with them is not forever, but in the early few engagements, we weren't allowed to call selling, right? Because people have such a sort of disassociative kind of relationship with selling. And that's real for some people, right? It's real for some people. And so we might need to go through a cultural shift that says servicing isn't selling, but selling is and can be and should be, frankly, ethical. It's not unethical, but we know that there are some perceptions out there that are fairly unhelpful. And many of your account management or even CS teams, probably, we see it in CS and service teams more, can struggle with the idea that selling could be ethical. But we need to equip them, once we've got over that, with what's needed for them to be successful. Just a quick sort of suggestion here. Gated sales process. You might have one for your new business teams, but you should also have one for your account management and CS teams. So gated sales process is literally just the key steps that you need to put in place in order to open, to qualify, develop, and close. If you keep it really, really simple. And Tracy will talk to you about this, but knowing her team, what we know is it depends, right? So if we're talking about an upsell of a specific ad hoc service, let's say, maybe the CS person there is responsible for opening, developing, and closing that. But if it's a large cross-sell opportunity, then maybe they're charged with opening it and doing some early stage qualification and then pulling the right person in order to develop and close it. So depending on your world, that's going to look differently for the people that we've got in the organization, in your teams, and what it is that they're tasked with. But what we suggest is you just break that process down and then think about the skills that are required to drive their ability to execute. So for example, the initial conversation, what do they need for that? What skill set? You might decide they need prospecting skills, actually, even though they dread the thought that they think that they were doing prospecting, but that's essentially what they're doing, prospecting. Maybe they need questioning skills or communication skills. And then once they get past that initial conversation in the discovery call, they're going to need active listening skills and questioning skills. And in the demo, or the solution presentation, whatever it might be, they're going to need persuasive communication skills. They need presentation skills, or maybe even objection handling. And then in the follow-up calls, if they are closing it, maybe they even need negotiation skills. You're going to have a whole host of different skills that you'll identify. And the idea is that we suggest you map those against the steps in your process so that you're clear about what it is that people need, what good looks like. And if we know what good looks like, we can then coach to what good looks like. If we don't know what's needed where, and we don't know what good looks like, how the hell are we going to coach to it? It's just not possible. It's just all too loose. And so the idea is, once we've done that, then we practice, we observe what it is that people do, we give feedback, and we coach. So there's the kind of 5. I've probably taken a little bit longer than I planned. So sorry. So the idea is this: check your GPS, goals, plans, strategies, and then think about these 5 things: pain-based value propositions, creating a culture of accountability, really developing strong coaching competence, getting the right people in the right seats, and then last but not least, let's make sure that people are capable of selling, not just servicing. So I'm going to stop there and hand us back over to Lewis. I don't usually talk for this long without interruptions or interactions, so I'm hoping I didn't send you to sleep, and there are at least some thoughts or questions that at some point you'll share with us.
Thank you very much, Chris, and I'm sure there will be questions coming in from the various people on the call. But to get the conversation going and sort of bring it, I guess, kind of into real life as well in terms of actual experience from the front line, I thought it'd be good to actually chat to Tracy and understand how that's been sort of put into play at Cypher over the last year or so. So Tracy, I know you're relatively new in the role at Cypher, but could you share with us what the overall vision has been for your department, what that is now, what the challenges have been compared to where you're headed versus where you were at the start of that journey, please?
Yeah, sure. And I can confirm Chris does talk that much, to be fair, in those. I'm kidding. I I guess for me and my role, the vision, which is across kind of the whole customer success team, is really quite simple in my eyes, which is about delivering an exceptional customer experience, and it's about improving the customer lifetime value. So quite simply for me, it's about making sure that we've got happy customers that stay longer. And I think, you know, that's pretty simple statement, pretty challenging to kind of do and to get there. You know, one of the, I guess a couple of the key challenges for me over the last 8-9 months have been kind of our customers, right? Let's make sure our customers are ready to go on that journey. You know, we've leaned in on them a lot, actually, in terms of their expectations and what they're looking for from us. And so just making sure that they are there and engaged and on that journey, I think, has been one of the key challenges. I think the team is another one, in terms of, you know, absolutely right, Chris, you know, right seats, right people has been critical for us, and making sure that the team are ready to go on that journey. And the business, right? So just internally talking to the business and getting the business used to essentially what is a customer first strategy. So for me, it's the 3 key challenges, which is, have I got the customers coming with me? Have I got the team coming with me? And is the business engaged in why this is important for us more broadly? So yeah, it's been an interesting 8-9 months for sure.
I guess kind of on that sort of right people in the right seats, could you sort of maybe talk us through how that process has worked and what you've done to try and sort of, I guess, kind of assess kind of where you stand on that front in terms of the journey and the people involved?
This is probably where we've spent a lot of time, actually, Lewis, in terms of this whole space. If I go right back to where we were last May or June time, we started by just engaging the whole customer base, right? So we spent a lot of time understanding from our customers what, you know, where they sat, which segment, which kind of, you know, size, shape, scale, what products that they used of ours, and mapped the customer base. But then spent time understanding what they wanted from us as an organization, what their expectation was of how we engage with them, what their expectation of was the product and the team. And you know, Chris called it out before, you know, we had a lot of people in the customer services team that were brilliant at servicing customers, absolutely brilliant at kind of, you know, talking about tickets and, you know, just generally having a conversation. But I knew, I feel like I'm repeating you now, Chris, but I kind of knew that kind of where, you know, where we'd gotten to is not where it was going to get us to in terms of going forward. So we engaged the customer, we understood their expectation. And then we looked inward. So we absolutely did a full review of our job descriptions. We looked at the competencies that we had in place. We looked at the KPIs that we had right across that team. And then we started a bit of a process, which was, let's understand what we had in that team. And what I would say is that we had an abundance of some good core skills, but an abundance of enthusiasm. So the team were very customer driven, and therefore it felt like a good canvas to start, and a great place for us to start from, actually, which was, look, these feel like the right people and they've got bags of enthusiasm. Let's start to assess where they are on that scale. And equally, that group of people who were really great at servicing, I knew that I wanted to take them into a world which was about growth, it was about retention, and it was about customer satisfaction. So I either knew that we needed to give them the skills and the toolkit to do that, or it was not going to be right for them, quite simply. And the interesting thing is we took a lot of those people on the journey. We parted ways with a couple, but we went on a bit of a journey with that whole team. And I think, you know, the whole process of understanding what we had, how we were going to redesign it. We did some org design in there as well as redesigning the roles and the profiles. But we got it to a place where I knew that we had the core group of people, and then we started to engage with Chris. And then with Chris, we got an extra layer of detail, which was we fully reassessed everybody in that team. We did disc profiles for everybody. Yeah. We understood where we had some skills gaps. We understood where we had some team gap dynamics that were missing. And it's interesting. I think it was Lisa and James before were talking about confidence and the ability to know the answers to questions. Well, that's exactly what my team were like. They needed the toolkit. They needed not all the answers, but they needed to know that there was a conversational way of having the discussion with a customer, and it's given them confidence, right? So it was the toolkit and the confidence that they've gotten through this process. And I think, we've just gone through our first 8 weeks of the immersion program. And I would add to the enthusiasm that the guys have had now, there's just a different level of confidence, and I think all they needed was I'm in the right job, I'm having the right conversations, I'm saying the right things, I feel comfortable doing it. Because it always, Chris, I've said this to you before, you saying some of those things and the way that you describe them conversationally is one thing, but the team have picked up on it, which has been fantastic. Yeah.
So I guess kind of, as you've gone through that program over the last 8-9 months, Tracy, what are you focusing on now? What's sort of on the agenda, for the quarter ahead as you look to try and push that revenue growth forward?
Aside from thinking now about 40% coaching in my work.
Yeah.
Look, we are at the point now where we have the right people in the right seats, just to coin that phrase, which is we're now moving them into that whole rigor and that cadence of the objectives and the KPIs and the measures and holding people to account. So, the remit for that team is to engage as many customers as possible and drive proper account plans. But they do have a remit to upsell and cross-sell, right? So part of that is, and we have Chris, you described kind of different sort of dynamics, but we are an organization that once it gets to a certain level and a certain volume, we work hand in glove with the sales team. So my guys are responsible for understanding what is available, understanding the opportunity, understanding enough about that opportunity to either close it themselves or to then bring in another member of the team more broadly to kind of engage with that customer. So for us, we're at a point of kind of letting everything settle in, get people used to that kind of consistency of language, but the measures and the metrics that are now in place. And absolutely, we've got a weekly cadence in place where we go through all of the key metrics and then we look at the trends on a monthly basis. So I'm very aware that we've thrown a lot at that team in the last 8 months. But I tell you, the feedback from our customers is phenomenal. So the feedback from customers is you listened, you acted, you delivered on your promises. And I've had more than a few of them say it's like a breath of fresh air. So it's great. We've got to take it on to the next level now, but we've certainly done a lot of work to get to this point. So yeah, it's been good.
Fantastic. Just thinking around, sort of getting some questions from the floor. I don't know, Lisa, Mark, if you've got thoughts that you had around customer success and our experience at Moneypenny, or experience elsewhere in terms of driving that.
Sorry, couldn't find the unmute button then. There you go. No, I think I agree lots with what's being said. I think our investment in people was huge back in the day. So when we did our reorg, that kind of shift from reactive inbound, ticket handling into that kind of more proactive account management, account growth. It's not been easy. It's really tough, and totally agree with Chris. It can't just be one session you do and all of a sudden everyone's great. It's that kind of feedback, ongoing, regular coaching. The big learning for me was making sure all your team fully understand the whys. So what's the end goal? There's no point just saying, guys, pick up the phone and try and sell live chat. They've got to understand why and what's the benefit to the customer, to us as a business. But yeah, really good session. It's been great hearing the stories.
Yeah, Lewis.
Yeah, go for it, Mark.
Very fascinating conversation. Really enjoyed it. I think we've all been on that journey. I think we've been on it. Certainly, people say for 2 years we introduced customer success, and that's what I think. A lot of that I put down. The success we're having at the moment is down to that empowerment. First of all, you talk to customers a lot, probably more than the sales team talk to customers, and you're probably not empowered to make commercial decisions. You don't think it's your job, your role, but actually in this world where everyone sells, every touch point for a customer is a selling opportunity in that respect. And since we've gone down that route, hiring the right people, doing the empowerment, either they are finding opportunities and passing leads over to the sales team, or they're actually, in some respects, I've just sold a couple of body-worn videos, and it's really quite encouraging what we've seen in that team. And it is about recruiting a different type of person. You know, they've come in from maybe a customer success role before, and had a very defined job description, very defined job role. And I think they've learned a lot and evolved quite a bit here in terms of how I've seen the confidence levels rise hugely, and the contribution's been fantastic.
Thanks, Mark. James has a question here around how important is it for customer success to understand those goals and targets? Chris, you mentioned this in your talk. I mean, what's your experience there around I guess kind of, yeah, it's almost like question I was writing down, you know, the definition of success, what are you actually sort of setting as the target? Is it retention? Is it a cross-sell target? The importance of that metric being out there.
I think it's really important. If we don't have clarity around the metrics, then you know, there's no opportunity to motivate people around those, to link this to their own personal goals. And I think that's the important thing. And you know, from experience as well, what sometimes I see is a top-down why it's important to the leadership team. That's not why it's important to the person on the ground. You know, the hope that we might exit in 3 years, well, that's not important to the person on the ground, right? Let me just be really candid to the group. What really matters is their why, and can their why connect to your why? And I think Mark and Lisa are certainly doing that in their businesses by the sounds of things. But I think it's key. You have to have the metrics, but it has to be something to do with why they get up in the morning, not why you do. That would be my thoughts.
Brilliant. Conscious of time, guys. Any further questions for Chris, for Tracy, whilst we've got them on the line, or shall we start to move to wrap up? I think that sounds like we're starting to move to close. So Sarah has popped in a feedback request into the chat. It'd be great to get your feedback on the session, anything we could be doing differently. Any other topics that you'd like to understand and drill into, particularly in sales and marketing, which is the area that Chris and I work on within ECI. So do please let us know. But listen, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Particularly thanks to Chris and to Tracy for making the time for this and for putting all the thought into the session. Thanks very much, and to Sarah as well for helping to compare and get all the tech working, which is always a joy. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks.